Hello. It's the day after Thanksgiving, and I think I'm titling this visual blog, or whatever you want to call it, since it's the first one I'm doing, um, to be or not to be. That is the question about what we mean by being. I work in the theater, and sometimes I have opinions that don't seem to have anything to do literally with acting or directing or writing, but I've always believed that a good actor or a good artist has something to say about life, and I think that part of what one says in one's work comes out of one's perception of reality, and that if one is in contact with reality, that affects what you actually express when you're working. And I'm just, we've just come out of a recent election, uh, and I was actually fairly surprised uh, because, with all the problems that the country is going through and all the problems, well, the world is going through lots of problems. I think we're actually living in an era of relative chaos in which we're seeing that many times uh, people that we elect who we think are leaders don't actually seem to be able to lead, and and all they seem to be able to do is somehow take care of themselves and raise money to get reelected so that they don't do anything. Uh, but for many years I didn't vote because I thought that if I voted, I was giving people the permission to do what I thought I didn't like in terms of government. Now I feel it's not just a responsibility to vote, I think it's a privilege. I've traveled a lot, and believe me, there's not a lot of democracy in the world, and Americans, I don't think that we actually understand how much freedom we have, and we very often think of other countries as just being democratic because they seem to be on our side. Uh, and this is very often a mistake. In in a lot of the countries that I've been in, the many people seem to believe that they need to get someone else's permission to try to do what they want to do. And whenever I've had actors or students come to New York, the most of the time they love it. And what it is that they're actually loving is the opportunity and the sense of freedom that they have here, which is different from what they have in places where they've grown up or where they've lived. Where again, if they want to do something, they have to get permission to do it. Were you surprised by the election? uh, we're living in a moment in history uh, where we see that the former president, Trump, who I've never particularly liked him. I didn't like him because I know about him from New York, and felt that he was a wheeler dealer, and very often got into projects and which didn't work, but he got out first and made millions. So I've just never liked him, and I was probably as surprised as anybody when he got elected. And to give him credit, I thought that he tried to confront China, and he did at least acknowledge that there was a problem in immigration. Uh, However, his unwillingness to accept defeat gracefully, to the extent where if he could have, he would have overturned the election, and still claims that he won the election and that it was stolen, is a disgrace and a tragedy to the country that a former president would actually not only feel how he feels, but would be willing to do what he was willing to do. What's probably worse is that a lot of people agreed with him. And the nice thing about the election was that many of the people who were deniers, who were claiming that the election was stolen, were not reelected, and they were trying to get enough power as Secretary of State where they would control elections, and most of them didn't win. Thank the people for having enough sense to reject it. And what's going to happen now, we'll see. He's declared for another election, and we'll see if he gets the nomination. I actually think that if he doesn't get the nomination, or if he feels that he might not get it, because he's clever, he's a clever person, not terribly stable, but nonetheless a clever person that you can't dismiss anymore. He was elected president, whether we like it or not. And I actually think that he would form another party just to, probably mess up the Republicans even more than he's messed them up. And, what will be interesting in the next, year and a half, 2 years, is to see how the Republican Party deals with him, and how many people will be willing to actually confront him, because he does need to be confronted. And of course Liz Cheney, who confronted him, lost her election, and should be brought back into the party in a position of power. I don't know what they're going to do. I'm an independent. I'll vote for who I think is going to do the best job. And then be disappointed. I'm lucky because I live in the world. I travel. I work in other countries, as well as working in New York, and so I feel like I'm a moving target. And I can just kind of move around, and if there's a problem, I'll go somewhere else. When I think of being an American, what it means to me is my freedom. I think Americans have more freedom than any place I've been, and I just hope that we will defend it. And we're in a moment where we can't rely upon government. Even the Supreme Court has taken a political turn in the last 20 years, with their, in an election with Al Gore in Florida, they made a decision, and I think they should have just sent it back to Florida to do a recount, and they didn't do that. And I think that was a political decision, not a legal decision. And that the problem of abortion and their overturning Roe Wade is creating an interesting reality, because states and people are deciding on what it is they believe should be done, which is maybe a good for a bad, because it forces us to take responsibility now that we can no longer depend on the court to have justice is not a question of blind, it's a question of being impartial, and that is not the case at the moment. I wish I could, I wish I didn't believe that, but I do. I hope that as I go ahead and do these blogs, that I'll get a little more concise and a little clearer in my thinking, so that I know I sometimes wander around, but I think I'm on the subject. To be or not to be. I do think one being alive in the world today, one has to be in contact with reality. And what reality is depends on how you perceive it. I mean, what is the truth? And what is the deeper truth? And certainly, if you read Shakespeare or the Greeks or great writers, they see the world that they are writing about very clearly. And I only hope that I can honor them by being as truthful and clear-sighted as I'm capable of being. So I think that's it for today, and thank you for any of you who listen, and I hope you'll come back and listen some more.